The most dangerous man in this hospital isn't a disease, it's the billionaire who owns it. And tonight, he's checking himself in as a penniless patient with a single, ruthless goal: to fire every single person who fails his impossible standards. He's prepared to document every flaw, every moment of indifference. But he's not prepared for Nurse Anya and the one simple act of kindness that will dismantle his entire world. His name is Marcus Thorne, and he built a billion-dollar empire by cutting costs and maximizing efficiency. He's convinced his hospitals are bleeding money because of lazy, indifferent staff. But what he's about to learn in the next 48 hours will challenge every assumption he has about care, cost, and the human heart. This is the story of a man who went looking for failures and instead found a single, extraordinary act that would change everything. To understand why Marcus Thorne would go to such extreme lengths, you have to understand the world he built and the crack in its foundation he refused to see. Thorne Healthcare wasn't just a business, it was a monument to a single, ruthless idea that healthcare was broken not by disease, but by human inefficiency. He built his first clinic 20 years ago, promising faster service and lower costs. He won contracts, bought out struggling hospitals, and streamlined them with the precision of an assembly line. Patient stays were shortened, supply costs were slashed, staffing levels were calculated to the bare minimum required by law. The result was a network of 34 hospitals that were, on paper, incredibly profitable. But the cracks began to show in the data his own board ignored. Patient satisfaction scores across the network had been sinking for 5 consecutive quarters. Staff turnover was at a staggering 32% annually, nearly double the national average. And yet, in the glass-walled executive suite on the top floor of the Thorne Tower, Marcus saw only one explanation: a culture of complacency. He believed his staff, from the surgeons to the janitors, were taking his money and giving less than their best in return. His breaking point came in the form of a confidential report leaked to him by a worried middle manager. It was from the Brighton General Emergency Room, one of his flagship facilities. The report detailed a near-catastrophic medication error missed by an exhausted nurse working her third double shift that week. The comment from the staff survey attached was a single, heartbreaking line: "We are too tired to care." Marcus didn't see a cry for help. He saw proof of systemic failure. He saw theft of time and duty, and he decided to become a predator in his own jungle. His plan, codenamed Operation Nightingale, was coldly brilliant. He would use a minor, pre-existing heart arrhythmia as his cover. His personal physician, one of the few people in on the secret, would falsify admission records to show him as Mark Turner, an uninsured laborer with a sporadic work history. He would be admitted to Brighton General through the ER, wearing thrift store clothes, carrying a wallet with only $20 in cash. For 48 hours, he would be just another vulnerable patient in the system, a hidden camera in a button recording every interaction. His goal was to create a list, a termination list. He expected to witness corners being cut, empathy being withheld, time being wasted. He planned to document it all, room by room, shift by shift, and then call an all-staff meeting to publicly clean house. He told his nervous COO, "I'm going to shock the compassion back into this place by firing the first 100 people who prove they don't have any." But Marcus Thorne, the master of data, missed 3 critical pieces of information. The first was the real reason for the staff turnover. It wasn't laziness, it was burnout. A systemic review published just that year in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that in hospitals with high efficiency pressures, nurse burnout rates averaged over 30%, and that burnout directly led to a 15% increase in patient safety incidents. His hospitals weren't filled with bad people. They were filled with good people being ground down by the very system he designed. The second thing he missed was the name Anya Sharma. She was a 34-year-old charge nurse on the very cardiac ward where he would be placed. Anya had been at Brighton General for 12 years. She was known for 2 things: an almost preternatural calm during crises, and a collection of thank you cards from patients that filled an entire bulletin board in the nurse's station. She was also drowning in debt from her mother's long-term care, working 60-hour weeks just to stay afloat. The compassion fatigue studies warn about people like her, the best caregivers, who absorb the most trauma until one day the well runs dry. The third thing Marcus didn't know was already on its way to his hospital: a lawsuit. The family of the patient from the medication error report had just retained a powerful attorney. They weren't just suing for malpractice, they were suing for systemic neglect, and they named Marcus Thorne personally in the filing, accusing him of prioritizing profit over human life. The papers would be served at his corporate office in 72 hours. His entire empire was now silently balancing on a knife's edge, and he was walking into the dark, believing he was the one holding the light. On a cold Tuesday evening in November, Marcus Thorne, billionaire, applied stage makeup to give himself a pallid, sickly look. He removed his Rolex, his wedding band, a relic of a marriage his ambition had destroyed, and put on a pair of worn-out jeans and a thin jacket. He looked in the mirror and saw a man defeated by life. He saw exactly what he wanted to see. He did not see a king about to walk naked into his own kingdom. He had his driver drop him off 6 blocks from Brighton General. The walk in the biting wind was his first taste of the vulnerability he sought to exploit. He shuffled into the glaring lights of the emergency room, his heart genuinely racing now, and uttered the line he had rehearsed. "I think there's something wrong with my heart, and I don't have any insurance." The triage nurse, a young man with dark circles under his eyes, scanned him with a tired gaze. He saw another body, another problem, another piece of paperwork. He handed Marcus a clipboard. "Fill this out. A doctor will see you when we have space." This was it, the indifference, the transactional coldness. Marcus felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He noted the nurse's name tag. First entry on the list, he thought. He settled into a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, surrounded by the coughs and cries and quiet despair of the sick and the poor. He prepared to watch his empire fail him, one uncaring employee at a time. What happened next was not an act of neglect. It was a simple, automatic gesture. A woman in scrubs, her hair in a messy bun, walked past him on her way out for a break. She stopped. She looked back. She saw a man alone, shivering slightly in his thin coat, clutching his chest not in dramatic pain, but in silent, anxious fear. She walked over to the linen cart, pulled out a thick, warm blanket, and without a word, draped it over his shoulders. She met his startled eyes and gave a small, tired smile. "The waiting's the worst part. It'll be okay." Then she was gone, disappearing down the hallway. Marcus Thorne sat frozen, the weight of the blanket unreal. It was a 5-second interaction. It cost the hospital maybe 50 cents. It broke no protocol and solved no medical issue. But it was a spear of pure, unscripted kindness that went straight through the armor of Mark Turner and hit the man underneath. He looked down at the coarse fabric, his mind scrambling. This wasn't part of the script. This was a variable he hadn't calculated. He wouldn't learn her name until later. It was Anya Sharma. She was just coming off a 16-hour shift, and with that single, instinctive act, she had just become the most dangerous person in Marcus Thorne's world. Because she had shown him a humanity his spreadsheets said shouldn't exist, and the shock of it would make his carefully planned mission impossible to continue. But the real revelation was still hours away, waiting for him in room 307. Because nurse Anya Sharma had a ritual with every new patient on her ward, and for the frightened, uninsured Mark Turner, that ritual would reveal a secret not about the hospital, but about the man who owned it. A secret buried so deep, even Marcus had forgotten it was there. The ritual was simple. For every new patient on her ward, nurse Anya Sharma would do 3 things. First, she would adjust the bed and the lights to their most comfortable position, asking, "Is that better?" Second, she would fill the pitcher by the bed with fresh ice water. And third, she would sit in the chair beside the bed, just for a moment, and ask one question: "What's the one thing you're most worried about right now?" When she performed this ritual for the man in bed 2 of room 307, she saw what everyone else saw. A middle-aged man, alone, with no family listed on his forms, his face etched with the kind of anxiety that comes from fearing not just illness, but the financial ruin that follows it. She saw Mark Turner, a construction worker with a shaky heartbeat and no safety net. Marcus Thorne, hiding inside that shell, was braced for cynicism. He was waiting for the hurried checklist, the perfunctory smile, the evidence that this kindness with the blanket was just a fluke. Instead, he got the ritual. He got the question. He almost gave the canned answer he'd prepared. The bill, but something in her demeanor, the genuine stillness, The way she wasn't looking at her watch made the truth slip out. Being irrelevant, he said, the words surprising him, dying in a system where you're just a number on a chart. Anya didn't offer empty reassurance. She nodded slowly, as if he'd named a real, tangible enemy. That's a heavy thing to carry on top of a bad heart, she said softly. For what it's worth, in this room you're not a number, you're Mark in bed too, and I'm Anya. We're going to get through this shift together. Then she stood, patted his blanket, and was gone to her next patient. Marcus lay there, his hidden camera capturing the empty space where she had been. His mind, a machine built for debits and credits, tried to process the transaction. He had given vulnerability, she had given dignity. There was no profit margin in that exchange. It shouldn't exist in his ecosystem, yet it did, and it dismantled him more effectively than any act of neglect ever could. This was the first crack in his mission. The second came an hour later, through the thin curtains separating him from bed one. His roommate was an elderly man named Mr. Higgins, who was recovering from a complex heart valve surgery. Marcus watched, through a gap in the curtain, as a young, harried nursing assistant named David came in to take Mr. Higgins's vitals. David moved quickly, his movements efficient but rushed. He barely made eye contact. Here it is, Marcus thought, his internal list-making instinct kicking in. Poor bedside manner, detached, note the name. But then Mr. Higgins, his voice weak, spoke up. David, was it? Your hands are freezing, son. David stopped. He looked at his own hands, then at the old man's face, and his own professional mask crumbled for a second, revealing pure, exhausted apology. I'm so sorry, Mr. Higgins. I've been running between the ice machine for specimen trays, and it's just been one of those nights. Let me warm them up. He briskly rubbed his hands together, blowing on them, before gently taking the man's wrist again. It's all right, Mr. Higgins whispered. You look like you could use a break yourself. David let out a short, humorless laugh. My break was 3 hours ago. We're 3 people down on this floor tonight, but don't you worry about me. How's the pain, really? Marcus listened, unseen. He wasn't hearing indifference. He was hearing *overwhelm. He was hearing a system so stretched that basic human warmth became a logistical challenge. This wasn't a character flaw in David, it was a mathematical failure. A failure of staffing models Marcus himself had mandated. Later that night, the escalation moved from personal observation to systemic shock. A code blue was called over the intercom, 2 rooms down. The sudden explosion of controlled chaos was terrifying. Marcus heard the running feet, the shouted orders, the frantic beeping of machines. From his doorway, he saw a swarm of people in blue descend on the room. And he saw Anya. Her calm was gone, replaced by a ferocious, focused intensity. She was directing 2 younger nurses, her voice sharp but clear. He saw her performing chest compressions, her hair coming loose from its bun, her face a mask of sheer will. For 15 minutes they fought, and they lost. The team filed out, their energy spent, their shoulders slumped. Anya was the last to leave. She stopped by the nurse's station, her back to the hallway. Marcus saw her lean heavily against the counter, her head bowed. He saw her shoulders shake once, twice, a single silent sob for a life she couldn't save. Then she took a deep, shuddering breath, smoothed her scrubs, wiped her face, and turned around. Her expression was composed, professional, ready for the next call light. In that moment, Marcus Thorne didn't see a nurse. He saw a soldier. He saw someone who absorbed trauma as part of the job, who grieved in 10-second increments, and who then had to walk into his room and ask if he needed more ice water. The cost of that, the human cost, was a line item that appeared on no balance sheet he had ever seen. He was reeling from this when his own crisis hit. A junior doctor, following the protocol for uninsured patients with cardiac symptoms, came to discuss his options. The doctor, kind but frank, explained that the full battery of tests to rule out serious causes would be expensive. As a self-pay patient, he could either consent to a scaled-back, less definitive assessment, or he could agree to the full workup and face a bill that would likely exceed $15,000. Take the full workup, Marcus heard himself say, the billionaire momentarily overriding the pauper's disguise. The doctor looked at him strangely. Mr. Turner, I have to stress the financial implications. I understand, Marcus said, his CEO voice breaking through. Do it all. The doctor left, puzzled, but the interaction had done something dangerous. It had forced Marcus to feel the trap his own policies created. He had designed this financial consent protocol to incentivize cost-conscious decision-making. He was now experiencing it not as a theory, but as a chilling choice between potential bankruptcy and potential misdiagnosis. The anxiety was visceral, paralyzing. It was the very fear his patients felt every day. Seeking a distraction, he turned on the small television in his room. The local news was on, and there on the screen was his own corporate headquarters. The caption read, "Lawsuit filed against Thorne Healthcare alleges profit over patients." The reporter stood outside Thorne Tower, detailing the lawsuit from the family of the medication error victim. They quoted the legal filing, "A system designed by Marcus Thorne that values throughput over care, creating an environment where preventable errors are inevitable." Marcus felt the room tilt. This was the public explosion he had feared. His secret mission was now unfolding inside a hospital that was itself a ticking public relations bomb. Every failure he documented could be Exhibit A in a case that could dismantle his life's work. He was drowning in this new reality when Anya came back for her final rounds. She noticed his ashen face, his fixed stare at the blank TV screen. She didn't ask about the news. She simply pulled the chair up again. "Rough night?" she asked, her own eyes still holding the ghost of the code blue. "The worst," he whispered, the truth tumbling out. I've worked in places where the bottom line is all that matters, where people are just units of production. I thought it was the only way to survive. But here," he trailed off, gesturing weakly at the room at her. Anya was quiet for a long moment. "You're not the first person from corporate to end up in one of these beds," she said, a subtle edge in her voice. "The people who design the spreadsheets never have to lie in the beds, you know. They see the numbers go up and down. They don't see Mr. Higgins teaching David how to play cribbage yesterday to keep his mind off the pain. They don't see the family that brings in homemade cookies for the night shift because we sat with their grandmother for an hour when she was scared. The profit is in the spreadsheet. The cost," she looked toward the room where the patient had died, "the cost is everywhere else." It was the most profound indictment of his philosophy he had ever heard. And it came not from a rival, but from a nurse earning $65,000 a year. Just then, a frantic voice called from the hallway, "Anya, we need you in 312, it's a rapid response." Anya was on her feet in an instant, but before she left, she did something unexpected. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped chocolate. She placed it on Marcus's bedside table. "For the irrelevance," she said with a tired smile, "it's not much, but it's something." And she was gone, running toward another crisis. Marcus picked up the chocolate, a cheap, mass-produced thing. It was a token of care that asked for nothing in return. It was the antithesis of every transaction he had built his life upon. He held it in his hand, the wrapper cool against his skin, and felt the walls of his identity cracking beyond repair. He was no longer Marcus Thorne, undercover hunter. He was Mark Turner, a patient being shown a devastating truth, and the most dangerous part was yet to come. Because as the night shift ended and the morning shift arrived, a new nurse would enter room 307 to take his vitals. She would look at his face, frozen with stress and lack of sleep. She would look at the name on his wristband, and her eyes would widen in sudden, shocked recognition. She had been his son's night nurse 5 years ago in a different Thorne hospital, and she remembered the billionaire father who never visited, not once. The secret of his greatest personal failure was about to walk through the door, and it would connect his two shattered worlds in a way he could never have imagined. The nurse's name was Brenda, and for 5 years she had carried the memory of a 14-year-old boy named Leo, who asked for his father every single night. She stood in the doorway of room 307, her hand frozen on the doorframe, her eyes locked on Marcus's face. The morning shift hustle flowed around her, but in that space, time stopped. She knew. The pallor of illness and the cheap clothes couldn't hide the sharp cut of his jaw, the distinctive arch of his brow that she'd seen in newspaper business sections. She walked in slowly, her movements deliberate. She didn't reach for his wrist to check his vitals. Instead, she stood by his bed, her voice a low, controlled tremor. "Mr. Thorne." The name, his real name, spoken in that room, felt like a physical blow. Marcus's heart monitor, still attached, betrayed him with a sudden spike in rhythm. He opened his mouth to deny it, to cling to the crumbling fiction of Mark Turner, but the look in her eyes, a mix of profound sadness and simmering anger, stole all the air from his lungs. "You don't remember me," she stated, not asked. "St. Michael's pediatric wing, 5 years ago, I was Leo's night nurse for 3 weeks." Leo, the name, was a key turning in a lock he had welded shut. His son, the brilliant, quiet boy from a marriage that had fractured under the weight of his ambition. The divorce had been bitter, and his ex-wife had gotten full custody, moving across the country. Marcus had told himself he was respecting boundaries, that his money for support was enough. But the truth was simpler and uglier. A sick child was a problem that couldn't be solved with a merger. It was messy, emotional, and it scared him. So he'd written the checks and looked away. "He had pneumonia that turned septic," Brenda continued, her gaze never leaving his. "It was touch and go. Your ex-wife, she never left his side. She slept in that chair." Brenda pointed to the very chair Anya had used. "And every night when his fever would spike, he'd get confused. He'd call out for you. 'Is my dad coming?' Did he call?" Marcus could only stare, a cold dread pooling in his stomach. "We tell him you were busy, that you'd call in the morning. He'd just nod like he expected it. The last night, when he was finally out of the woods, he told me, 'My dad builds big, important things. That's why he can't come.'" Brenda's voice finally broke. "He made an excuse for you, a 14-year-old boy making an excuse for his billionaire father." She picked up his chart, her hands now shaking with a different kind of fatigue. "I don't know what game you're playing here, Mr. Thorne, dressing up like one of us, but I hope you get everything you deserve." She turned and walked out, leaving Marcus utterly alone with the ghost of his greatest failure. The revelation was a poison, and it spread fast. He was still reeling, the beep of his heart monitor a mocking echo of his panic, when his personal phone, hidden under his mattress, vibrated with an urgent news alert. The lawsuit story had exploded. A major network had picked it up, running a primetime segment titled "The Human Cost of Efficiency." They interviewed the grieving family. They showed graphs of Thorne Healthcare's soaring profits alongside its plummeting patient satisfaction scores. And they named him, repeatedly, as the architect of the system. Worse, they had a source. Someone inside Brighton General was talking. The report mentioned chronic understaffing and morale at a breaking point. Marcus's mind raced. Was it Brenda, seeking revenge? David, the overworked assistant? It could have been anyone. His undercover operation was now operating inside a house that was not only on fire, but being broadcast live on national television. His COO, Robert, called him on the secret phone, his voice strangled with panic. "Marcus, the board is in emergency session. They're talking about suspending you pending an investigation. The stock is in freefall. You have to come in now and address this." "I can't," Marcus whispered, his eyes on the doorway where Brenda had stood. "What do you mean you can't? Where are you?" "Inside it, Robert," Marcus said, the truth tasting like ash. "I'm inside the problem." He ended the call. The mission was in ruins. The list of names to fire was now a meaningless document. He had come to find lazy people and found exhausted saints. He had come to document indifference and had been shown catastrophic, systemic neglect, a neglect he had authored. And now, the personal pillar of his own neglect had been resurrected to condemn him. He was trapped. To leave was to face the corporate and media hellstorm. To stay was to drown in a rising tide of guilt. He chose to drown. When Anya returned for the day shift, she found a different man. The anxious tension was gone, replaced by a hollow, devastated stillness. She saw the news playing silently on the TV, the ticker at the bottom scrolling with his company's falling stock symbol. She followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "You know," she said softly, not as a nurse, but as one human being to another, "whoever that guy is on TV, he's having a worse day than you are." A bitter, choked sound escaped Marcus's throat. It was almost a laugh. "You have no idea," he mumbled. "Maybe not," Anya said, checking his IV line. "But I know what it's like to carry something so heavy you think it'll crush you, the secret debts, the regrets." She paused, her professionalism warring with a deep, empathetic instinct. "That thing you said about being irrelevant, I don't think that's your real fear. I think your fear is that your seen truly seen and found lacking. Her words were a scalpel, precise and merciful. They cut through the last of his defenses. He looked at this nurse, who had fought to save a life and lost, who carried her own burdens, and yet still had a chocolate in her pocket for a stranger's fear. It's all lacking, he confessed, the words flooding out. Everything I built, it's a shell. It's efficient and it's profitable, and it's killing the very thing it was supposed to do. I see it now. I see you, and I see what it costs you to do this job inside the machine I made. He was crying now, silent tears of shame cutting through the stage makeup. My son was in one of my hospitals, and I wasn't there. Anya didn't recoil. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply handed him a tissue from the box on the table. Then be here now, she said, with a quiet, unshakable firmness. Wherever here is for you. At that moment, a crash echoed from the hallway, followed by a cry. Anya was up in an instant, her caregiver's reflex overriding the moment. Marcus watched her go, be here now. He got out of bed, his body stiff, his heart still fluttery with arrhythmia and emotion. He shuffled to the door. Down the hall, Mr. Higgins, his roommate, had tried to get up on his own and had fallen. David and another aide were carefully helping him back into bed, checking for injuries. The old man was embarrassed, apologizing over and over. It's my fault, David was saying, his face anguished. I should have checked on you sooner. I was covering the other hall. No, son, it's these old legs, Mr. Higgins insisted. Marcus watched, and a clear, terrible calculation formed in his mind. This was the direct result, the staffing model, the pressure for efficiency, a fall that could lead to a broken hip, a catastrophic decline. This was the preventable error the lawsuit mentioned, happening in real time, and he had caused it. He turned back to his room, his mind clicking into a different gear, not the gear of a predator, but of a commander assessing a battlefield where he had just bombed his own troops. He grabbed his hidden phone. He called Robert back. Robert, listen to me very carefully. I am still the CEO. You will do 3 things right now. First, you will authorize immediate overtime pay at time and a half for every single staff member at Brighton General, retroactive to the start of this week. Second, you will hire 20 temporary agency nurses and 10 nursing assistants for this facility today, no matter the cost. Third, you will draft a press release stating that Thorne Healthcare is initiating an independent, top-to-bottom review of patient care standards and staffing models across the entire network, and that I will personally lead it. Robert was sputtering. Marcus, the board will never approve that kind of unilateral spending, the liability, the precedent. I don't care, Marcus said, his voice low but ironclad. You will make it happen, or I will call an emergency shareholder meeting from this hospital bed and explain to them exactly how their profits were generated. Do you understand? There was a long silence on the other end. They're going to crucify you, Robert whispered. Let them, Marcus replied, and hung up. He had just launched a mutiny against his own board. He had committed financial heresy, and for the first time in 20 years, he felt a sliver of peace. It was the peace of a man who has finally stopped running from the damage he has done and has instead turned to face it. But the universe, it seemed, was not done testing him. As he stood by the window, watching the morning light wash over the city he once thought he owned, his phone buzzed again. It was a text from a private number. It contained a single, grainy photograph. It showed him, in his thrift store clothes, being helped out of his personal driver's town car 6 blocks from the hospital, taken from what looked like a building security camera. The text that followed was brief. Playing pauper, Marcus. The board would love to know where you really are, and so would the press. Let's talk. Ivy. Ivy, his former head of strategic communications, a woman as brilliant as she was ruthless, whom he'd fired 6 months ago for proposing a campaign to blame patient complaints on unrealistic consumer expectations. She had sworn vengeance, and now she had found the ultimate weapon. She had uncovered his secret. His secret was no longer his. The undercover boss was now the exposed king, naked and vulnerable not just to the compassion of a nurse, but to the vengeance of a viper. And Ivy didn't want to fix his system. She wanted to burn it to the ground with him inside it. The final battle was no longer about saving his company. It was about surviving the coming inferno. Marcus Thorne had 48 hours before his world ended. The countdown started with a single, mocking reply. He stared at Ivy's text, the grainy photo a tiny window into his own hubris. He could almost hear her laugh. His first, instinctive thought was to call his security team to bury the threat in legal threats and non-disclosure agreements. It was the old playbook, the Thorne playbook, but the man in the hospital bed, wrapped in a 50-cent blanket, holding a piece of charity chocolate, knew that playbook was what had brought him here. He typed a reply, not to Ivy, but to his COO, Robert. Call an emergency board meeting. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. I will be there. And Robert, tell them everything. Then he texted Ivy. His message was simple. The board meets tomorrow at 9. You're welcome to tell them whatever you like. I'll be telling them the truth. He put the phone down. The die was cast. He spent the rest of that day and the next as Mark Turner, but the performance was over. He watched the new agency nurses arrive, easing the frantic pace on the floor. He saw David, the nursing assistant, actually take a full lunch break. He heard the subtle shift in the atmosphere. The laughter at the nurses' station wasn't as strained. His money, thrown like a grenade at his own policies, was having an immediate, tangible effect. It was the easiest problem he'd ever solved, and it had taken him 20 years to see it. When Anya came for her final check before her shift ended, she found him dressed not in his gown, but in the same thrift store clothes, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're leaving?" she asked, a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Against medical advice, I hope you know, your tests aren't all back." "I have to," he said, standing. He faced her. "Anya, I need to tell you something. My name isn't Mark Turner." She crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. "I know." He blinked. "You know." Brenda from the night shift told me. She was upset, and the sudden flood of agency nurses and the overtime authorization memo that came down from corporate with your name all over it, it wasn't hard to connect the dots. She didn't smile. "So, Marcus Thorne, was this all some kind of corporate espionage? Were you gradding us?" He flinched. "It started that way. I came here to find people to fire. I thought you were all failing." Anya let out a long, slow breath, looking at the floor. When she looked up, her eyes were bright with something that wasn't anger, but profound disappointment. "And what did you find, Mr. Thorne?" He swallowed hard. "I found that I was the failure. I found heroes working in a system designed by a villain. I found you." His voice broke. "And I am so, so sorry." The apology hung in the antiseptic air. Anya studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then she nodded just once. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, what are you going to do now?" "I'm going to try and fix what I broke," he said. "Starting with the board, they might fire me for it." A ghost of a smile touched her lips. "From what I've seen, getting fired might be the best thing that ever happened to you." She handed him a small, folded piece of paper. "My mother's in a long-term care facility. The bills are a lot, if you're looking for a project." He took the paper, the weight of her trust immense. He had expected rage, demands, accusations. He had received a quiet, devastating grace. It was the final, definitive lesson. An hour later, Marcus Thorne walked out of Brighton General through the main lobby, not the ER doors. He didn't slouch. He carried the weariness of his two-day ordeal not as a disguise, but as a badge. His driver was waiting. The ride to Thorne Tower was silent. The boardroom was a temple of cold, modern design, all sharp angles and silent judgment. 12 faces stared at him as he entered. Ivy was there, sitting triumphantly beside the board chairman, a smug smile on her face. On the large screen was the security camera photo of him in his disguise. "Marcus," the chairman began, his voice icy. "You have exactly 10 minutes to explain why we shouldn't vote unanimously to remove you for gross misconduct, reckless fiscal irresponsibility, and what appears to be a profound breach of fiduciary duty." Marcus didn't sit. He walked to the head of the table and stood, placing his hands on the cool glass. He looked at each director, then at Ivy. "You're right," he said. The room went still. "I have committed a gross misconduct. For 20 years, I have misconducted the purpose of this company. I built a machine that optimized for shareholder profit while it slowly degraded patient care and broke the spirits of the people who provide it. The reckless fiscal irresponsibility was not authorizing overtime yesterday. It was the 2 decades of starving our hospitals of the resources they needed to be humane. The breach of duty was not going undercover. It was refusing to see the human reality behind my own spreadsheets. He paused, letting his words sink in. Ivy's smile had vanished. I went to Brighton General to find lazy people, he continued. I found a nurse named Anya Sharma who gave a blanket to a shivering stranger because it was the right thing to do. I found a nursing assistant named David who was so run off his feet he couldn't warm his hands before touching a patient. I watched a team fight to save a life and lose, and then wipe their tears and go answer the next call light. I was presented with a $15,000 medical bill I designed and felt the terror it creates. I was recognized by a nurse who remembers my son asking for me when he was sick, and I wasn't there. He saw a few board members look down, uncomfortable. This company is sick, Marcus stated, his voice clear. The lawsuit is a symptom. The low scores are a symptom. The 30% turnover is a symptom. The disease is a philosophy that values efficiency over humanity, and I am the primary carrier. So here is what I am going to do. I'm going to launch the independent review I promised. I'm going to reinvest 20% of our annual profits directly into staff support, wellness programs, and patient comfort initiatives. I am going to overhaul our staffing models with input from nurses like Anya Sharma, and I am going to publicly apologize to the family in that lawsuit and settle it fairly, not fight it. The chairman stared, stunned. The shareholders will revolt. The stock price. The stock price is already in the toilet, Marcus interrupted. We can try to pump it back up with more cuts, more spin, more of what Ivy here is so good at. He looked directly at her. Or we can build something real, something that heals. I don't know if it will work, but I do know the old way is morally bankrupt and now, finally, financially exposed. He straightened up. You have a choice. You can fire me today. I'll walk out and I'll use my personal shares to start a foundation that does this work from the outside, and I will become your loudest, most damaging critic. Or you can let me try to fix this, but know that if you vote to keep me, you are voting to end the era of profit at any cost. That era is over. He sat down. The silence was absolute. Ivy finally spoke, her voice a razor. This is sentimental nonsense. He's had a nervous breakdown. He's not fit to run a lemonade stand. But the board chairman was looking at Marcus, really looking. He saw the dark circles, the raw honesty, the complete absence of the arrogant bluster he was used to. He saw, perhaps, a leader who had finally found a purpose worth more than money. The vote was called. It was not unanimous, but when the tally was read, Marcus Thorne remained, by a margin of 1 vote, the CEO. Ivy stood, gathered her things, and left without a word. Her blackmail had failed because Marcus had disarmed it by telling the truth first. The weapon only works in the dark. In the weeks that followed, the changes at Thorne Healthcare were seismic. The Nightingale Initiative was launched, named with a private irony only Marcus understood. Staffing ratios were improved. A company-wide debt relief program for employees' family medical bills was instituted. Anya's mother was the first beneficiary. The lawsuit was settled with a substantial, no NDA settlement and a public apology. Marcus stepped down from 2 prestigious, empty business councils and instead joined the board of a National Nurses Association. He sold 2 of his yachts and turned the proceeds into a fund for nurse mental health services. But the final, surprising detail came on a Tuesday morning 3 months later. Marcus was working in his office, now decorated with thank you cards from hospital staff instead of financial awards. His assistant announced a visitor. It was Leo. His son, now 19, tall and serious, stood in the doorway. They talked for hours. It was awkward, painful, and honest. Leo didn't want money. He wanted to understand. Marcus told him everything: the ambition, the fear, the hospital, the blanket, the chocolate. He showed him the folded piece of paper from Anya, now framed on his wall. At the end, Leo said, "I'm applying to nursing school." Marcus felt the world tilt. What? After what happened to me, and after what you've been talking about publicly, I want to help build the thing you're trying to fix. Leo shrugged, a gesture so familiar it stole Marcus's breath. Maybe we can be bad at showing up for each other in different decades. It was the redemption he had never dared to pray for. It had not arrived in a boardroom coup or a stock rebound. It had arrived in the quiet choice of his son, a choice inspired not by the empire he built, but by the man he had finally become. Marcus Thorne had gone looking for failures to fire. He found a single act of kindness that fired something in him instead. It shattered his cynicism, bankrupted his old values, and in that empty space, something fragile and real began to grow. He learned that the most expensive thing in healthcare isn't the latest machine or the most brilliant surgeon. It's the time it takes to warm your hands before touching a patient. It's the spare blanket. It's the chocolate in the pocket. And it's the only thing that truly heals. The story of the undercover boss had reached its end, but the story of the man was just beginning. The story of Marcus Thorne is not a fairy tale. It is a diagnosis of a sickness that infects far more than just hospitals. It is the belief that efficiency and humanity are opposing forces on a balance sheet, that compassion is an unaffordable luxury in a competitive world. We build systems to scale, to grow, to maximize, and in doing so, we often design the humanity right out of them. We create environments where the Anyas of the world, the caregivers, the teachers, the helpers, burn out not because the work is hard, but because the system actively strips the meaning from it. The research is clear. When cognitive load is too high and support is too low, empathy is the first casualty. We don't become bad people. We become overwhelmed people. And overwhelmed people make mistakes, miss connections, and build walls to survive. Marcus's journey from predator to patient to reformer reveals a painful truth. The most powerful force for change is not a grand strategic plan conceived in a boardroom. It is proximity. It is the act of walking into the reality you've created from a distance. It is feeling the cold hands of an overworked aide. It is hearing your own policies explained to you as a source of terror. It is being offered a blanket or a chocolate or a simple question. What are you most worried about when you deserve neither kindness nor an answer? His transformation began not when he decided to change his company, but in the moment he allowed himself to be seen and in return to truly see another person. Anya Sharma did not set out to reform a billionaire. She simply performed her ritual. She treated a human being with dignity. And in that small, powerful transaction, she demonstrated that the soul of any enterprise, be it a hospital, a school, or a corporation, is not found in its profit margins, but in the quality of its smallest interactions. So what does this mean for us? It means the undercover boss is a metaphor for a choice we all face. We can remain in our boardrooms, our ivory towers, our isolated silos, interpreting the world through data points and detached judgments. Or we can choose to walk the halls, to listen to the stories that don't make the reports, to seek out the quiet acts of grace that hold our fragile institutions together, and then have the courage to build systems that protect and amplify those acts, rather than extinguish them. Redemption for Marcus wasn't found in keeping his empire. It was found in losing his old self. It was in the terrifying, liberating act of trading certainty for conscience and discovering that what he gained was worth infinitely more than what he risked. We often carry the belief that our past failures define us, that the cost of our mistakes is a debt too large to ever repay. But Marcus's story suggests a different ending. Sometimes, the universe does not demand payment. It simply asks for presence. It sends a teacher, often disguised in the most ordinary of roles, to remind us of who we could be if we stopped protecting who we were. If this story reminded you of a moment of unexpected kindness or of a system that needs your voice, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes, the spark of change is just a story away. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to join us for more journeys into the human heart. Until next time.